All right, let's jump right into this explainer. So, did you know that a single, overlooked ethical lapse in an environmental audit can actually cascade into millions of dollars in fines? Or worse, irreversible ecosystem damage? It's huge. Today, we're unpacking the massive stakes and the ethical foundations of being an ISO 14001:2026 lead auditor. You see, when we talk about environmental management systems, we aren't just talking about pushing paper around a desk. We're talking about the real mechanisms that prevent pollution, manage hazardous waste, and protect our ecosystems. And as a lead auditor, you are literally the critical enabler of that environmental integrity. So we're going to focus squarely on the professional and ethical standards that absolutely must govern your every move.
To get there, we've got a clear roadmap today covering 5 key pillars: the ethical mandate, code of conduct expectations, the impartiality obligation, managing conflicts of interest, and finally, continuing professional development.
Think about this for a second. Audit outcomes influence decisions that affect environmental protection, public health, and long-term ecological sustainability. It's a heavy responsibility, right? An ethical lapse here isn't just a simple paperwork error. No way. It can literally result in unchecked carbon emissions, illegal dumping, or long-term ecosystem destruction. The organizations you audit, along with regulators and the general public, rely entirely on your independent, objective findings. They need you to ensure that environmental responsibility is actually happening on the ground, and not just, being talked about in a corporate brochure.
Okay, so let's get into Section 1, the ethical mandate.
At its core, environmental auditing relies heavily on your personal ethical discipline to safeguard the legitimacy of the entire global certification system. You're operating in tricky environments where organizational culture, regulatory sensitivity, and major financial risks all converge. This is what we call the foundation of trust, avoiding manipulation, bias, and the misuse of confidential information. Because think about what happens if auditors fail to maintain this foundation. Organizations might falsely claim compliance, right? They could use a flawed audit to hide weak pollution prevention measures. And that completely undermines global sustainability goals and shatters stakeholder trust. Your ethical mandate is exactly what ensures your audit findings reflect the actual, on-the-ground performance of the environmental management system, entirely free from external influence or pressure.
Moving right along, let's hit Section 2, Code of Conduct Expectations.
Now, the Code of Conduct, it isn't just some theoretical concept gathering dust on a shelf. It establishes the exact behavioral expectations that guide you through complex, and let's face it, often high-pressure audit interactions. We're talking about integrity here, the absolute commitment to honesty, truthfulness, and ethical decision-making based solely on objective evidence. This means presenting findings truthfully, without exaggeration, without omission, and certainly without bowing to organizational pressure. You absolutely cannot alter evidence or suppress information that points to a nonconformity. If an organization is failing to meet their emission limits, well, integrity demands that your report reflects that hard reality, regardless of how much pressure you might face to kind of soften the blow.
And this ties into a whole set of expected auditor behaviors, like honesty, professional competence, diligence, confidentiality, and respecting legal requirements. Think about strict confidentiality, for example. During an audit, you're probably going to encounter highly sensitive proprietary data, things like hazardous emission records, or maybe some brand new, confidential eco-design plans. You are expected to securely protect that information, ensuring it is never ever shared with competitors, while simultaneously making sure your environmental findings remain completely transparent and accurate. It's a delicate balance for sure, but it's absolutely critical.
Okay, let's shift gears to Section 3, the impartiality obligation.
This right here is really all about your mindset and your independence. Impartiality is the principle of objectivity and neutrality. It means your decisions have to be driven 100% by objective evidence, completely free from personal bias or external pressure. Your findings can never be influenced by a client's reputation, any financial incentives they might try to offer, or even commercial pressures coming from your own certification body. You just can't assume an organization is compliant just because they have this famous, high-profile sustainability brand. Evidence, and evidence alone, has to drive your conclusions. Maintaining that absolute neutrality is literally the only way to ensure real, tangible environmental protection.
Which brings us perfectly into Section 4, Managing Conflicts of Interest.
So, managing conflicts of interest is a foundational pillar of the ISO 14001-2026 framework because it represents one of the absolute greatest threats to your credibility as an auditor. And here's the thing. Actual conflicts and perceived conflicts are equally dangerous. An actual conflict, like a direct financial interest or dependence on the auditee, that's usually pretty easy to spot. Maybe you have a financial investment in the company. But a perceived conflict, that can be just as damaging. Even if you remain perfectly, flawlessly objective, auditing a chemical plant that you previously did consultancy work for, that destroys stakeholder trust instantly. If the public perceives that you might be biased because of a past relationship, the credibility of the whole audit is already lost.
This is exactly where those perceived conflicts can really trap us. We're looking at things like financial dependence, past or expected employment, family ties to staff, or organizational pressures. For example, imagine you're assigned to review an environmental risk matrix that you actually helped design 2 years ago as a consultant. I mean, that is a massive self-review threat. It's just basic human nature to want to defend a system you helped build, right? But doing so completely compromises your neutrality. You have to be hyper-aware of these common sources of conflict at all times. So how do we handle this? The crucial point is following a strict set of steps to armor your independence before an audit engagement even begins. 1. Identify potential conflicts early. 2. Evaluate their significance and risk. 3. Disclose them transparently via independence declarations. And 4. Mitigate them, maybe by changing auditors or adding oversight. It always starts with that transparent disclosure. Certification bodies require you to sign those independence declarations for a reason. If you spot a conflict, you evaluate it and you mitigate it, often by simply getting a different auditor assigned to the job. Honestly, transparency here is your ultimate shield.
All right, moving into our final area, Section 5, Continuing Professional Development. Here is the reality. Lifelong learning is basically mandatory. Because environmental science, climate risks, and digital tools are shifting so rapidly, your competence as an auditor is not static. It requires constant upgrading just to remain effective. Think about it. What was considered cutting-edge environmental management just 5 years ago might be completely obsolete today. ISO 14001-2026 specifically demands that you keep pace with this modern evolution. You essentially have to maintain this dense web of knowledge across several key categories. For instance, in regulatory awareness, you have to be tracking new environmental laws, emission limits, and waste rules. For technological advancement, you need to understand how organizations are deploying things like IoT sensors and digital twins to measure their environmental footprint. And of course, you've got to deepen your sustainability knowledge, grasping circular economy principles, zero waste, carbon neutrality, while constantly reflecting on ethical responsibility and conflict management. Your certification validity literally depends on documented evidence of this continuous learning.
Just look at the external forces that are compelling you to constantly learn. A massive 35% is driven by regulatory changes alone. Then you've got tech innovations at 30%, climate risks at 20%, and shifting stakeholder expectations making up the rest. This is exactly why you must actively engage in workshops, professional forums, and collaborative learning. You have to understand the transition risks of things like carbon pricing, the physical risks of extreme weather on supply chains, and what the public actually expects from sustainability today. So I want to leave you with this somewhat provocative thought. How will your personal integrity and commitment to learning shape the future of global environmental resilience? When you look at all these requirements, the code of conduct, the strict impartiality, the relentless need for continuous learning, it's so easy to just see them as a bunch of rules. But I want to remind you, these are not just bureaucratic hurdles. They are the very tools that make your role so incredibly meaningful and impactful. By maintaining your independence and constantly upgrading your expertise, you aren't just auditing a company. You are directly contributing to the resilience and the protection of our entire global environment. Thanks so much for diving into this explainer with me today.